Good morning, Arcade Church. If you don't know me, my name is Cole Harper. I'm one of the pastors on staff here. If you don't know me from church, you probably know me judging by the amount of flannel I'm wearing from the paper towel covers. I've never worn this much flannel in my life, so I either look like the paper towel dude or the guy who cuts you off on the way to Tahoe. Go ahead and turn with me to Isaiah chapter 46. It's going to be verses 1 through 13. And if you don't have a Bible with you, that's completely fine. Use the one in the pew in front of you. The page number for that is 409 to 410, okay? These are the words of Christ. Bel crouches, Nebo cowers. Idols depicting them are consigned to beasts and cattle. The images you carry are loaded as a burden for the weary animal. The gods cower. They crouch together. They are not able to rescue the burden, but they themselves go into captivity. Listen to me, house of Jacob, all the remnant of the house of Israel who have been sustained from the womb, carried along since birth. I will be the same until your old age, and I will bear you up when you turn gray. I have made you, and I will carry you. I will bear and rescue you. To whom will you compare me or make me equal? Who will you measure me with so that we should be like each other? Those who pour out their bags of gold and weigh out silver on scales, they hire a goldsmith and he makes it into a god. Then they kneel and bow down to it. They lift it to their shoulder and bear it along. They set it in its place, and there it stands. It does not budge from its place. They cry out to it, but it doesn't answer. It saves no one from his trouble. Remember this and be brave. Take it to heart, you transgressors. Remember what happened long ago. For I am God and there is no other. I am God and no one is like me. I declare the end from the beginning and from long ago what is not yet done, saying, my plan will take place and I will do all my will. I call a bird of prey from the east, a man for my purpose from a far country. Yes, I have spoken, so I will also bring it about. I have planned it, I will also do it. Listen to me, you hard-hearted, far removed from justice. I am bringing my justice near. It is not far away, and my salvation will not delay. I will put salvation in Zion, my splendor in Israel. You ever notice how the Christmas presents you get, especially as a kid, they kind of function like rings in a tree stump when you cut it down, right? They leave a physical record, in this case, of your interests and like what you're into, right? Because a lot of us got Christmas presents based on the lists we made, and well, my Christmas present rap sheet is just as weird as anyone else's, I'm sure. I had my Ninja Turtle phase, right? So mine was Donatello, like the purple mask. He was like the inventor dude, had the bow staff, which led not inconsequentially to my inventor phase, right? So I was always asking for like the Legos that took the batteries and made the complicated machines or capsulas with all these gears and stuff. Chess phase Christmas was about as boring as you would expect. No real, 5-alarm deals there. Punk phase Christmas was rough in the Harper household. I opened my present that morning to my ultra-wide leg JNCOs. Anybody here ever wear JNCOs, right? I took those out, and I kid you not, it's Christmas morning, I'm under the tree, but somehow I started flunking math immediately just by taking them out of the box. They have this weird effect on you. I also remember when I got my first grown-up study Bible. During my what? Christian phase? Is that a thing? Let's do a gut check here, right? Let me ask you something. How do you know you won't look back on this morning, I don't know, a few months from now, a few years, and think of this, maybe fondly, as part of your Christian phase? Are you in one right now? Or is your identity waiting on the goodness of God to fulfill his promises built on something a lot stronger than your zeal, your spiritual temperature, or your life stage? It's kind of what I want to explore with you this morning. Our Advent series and the waiting, it really reflects the shared experience we have as the Church of Jesus Christ with Israel, if you think about it, right? Just as Israel waited as exiles for the first coming of the Messiah, we're waiting, as 1 Peter says, elect exiles, waiting for his second coming. And in both cases, the temptation is the same: to issue a vote of no confidence in how God's plan is unfolding in our own lived experience. And the reason we struggle with that is because we do not know how to wait. In the scriptures, more often than not, the opposite of waiting is actually idolatry. Isn't that weird? Turning to powers and practices we do not understand because we think they can grant us a better story than the one God is unfolding through the gospel in our lived experience. And this is why, have you ever thought about this? So many of Israel's national tragedies and meltdowns have clotted or clustered around the failure to wait. The Israelites were led out of Egypt. 2 walls made of water, just marched right through. You'd think your doubting days are over, right? Moses ran a little late, though, up on Sinai. You don't know what the plan is, and then rather than persevere in the waiting, the Israelites fashioned a golden calf, likely one of the Egyptian deities they'd learned to worship in slavery. It was Saul's appointment to be king that signals Israel's refusal to wait, in this case, for God to make his kingship visible in a way that was palatable to them, I guess. They wanted a king like the nations, and they got a king who himself embodied the impatient appetites of this Israelite people. Think of Saul's faithless sacrifice, sort of forged in fatalism there. He could not wait for Samuel to show, and it's signaling something is misfiring in the nature of Israel as a waiting people. And who can forget Saul's later embrace of a necromancing psychic to try to call Samuel from the dead because he couldn't wait to get the itching, what would it be, reassurance he needed. Because this is all a shared experience. We don't understand what the perfect and decent faithfulness of Christ looks like, especially in indecent times. And our modern, I think, secular instinct is to think of those idols as figurative or rhetorical, not realizing that our running towards those practices and powers that enslave, they're not just letting off steam, right? They're more like picking teams in a cosmic game of kickball. But we reduce it to mere distractions, don't we? Bad habits, especially in Christian circles. My phone is like such an idol in my life, right? Blow the bangs out of your face. It's a living. Or, I have so many idols in my heart right now, you don't even know. And I think these superficial cliches, of idolatry lead to equally shallow advice to those who around us who are waiting and trying to persevere in Christ the best they can through their pain and frustration. We tell singles who want to be married that their frustration with being single is because they've obviously made an idol of marriage in their life, right? Or we tell people the reason they can't sense God's will and the path forward on a non-moral issue is because there's just too many idols in your heart, man. But the Bible rarely, if ever, speaks of idols that way. Rather, idolatry is turning to the very powers and practices Christ is at war with to give you a better story. And idols were tempting to the exile community in Babylon that Isaiah in this passage is addressing because they offered an alternative way to make sense of how their life was going. Especially when God's plan seemed too slow and too painful. It gave them quick answers, it gave them control, but you know what else it did? Idolatry let them pretend to be someone else, provided they let these rival powers and practices rewrite the meaning in their lives. And they're sitting in Babylon with their identity as God's chosen people. Feels like a distant memory, maybe a dream, right? Once called out of nothing and promised a future that would rescue the world from idolatry, they're now marooned under the shadow of Babylonian gods and idols whose people look way more prosperous and safe than they do. Waiting on God felt unbearable. And maybe you can relate if you think about it, because waiting on God in Babylon, you know what their experience was? God's time no longer made sense to them at all. And I'm not just saying that like in a kind of artsy-fartsy figurative way. Their sacred rhythms as a people, right? Sabbaths, feasts, all of that, the entire Jewish calendar, basically meaningless if you're not in the land to celebrate it. Their whole spiritual life felt like that thing you do when you take a nap after work or school, and then you wake up and for a brief minute, you don't know if it's morning the next day or evening of the same night. You know that weird, like just no man's land? That's Israel's life, right? Endurance no longer made sense. Without the temple, without worship and sacrifices, covenant renewal, it's kind of impossible or it's on hiatus. You kind of just think, I guess God is canceled. I don't know. For many, it would have seemed worse than that. It would have seemed like Babylon's gods, Bel and Nebo, that they were stronger and they had somehow vanquished the God of Israel. The people looked stronger. Babylonians were like the black and white photograph you get with the frame at Home Goods, right? Black and white clarity, everybody looks safe, everybody looks secure. Whereas like the Israelite experience, it's just endless struggle. To be an Israelite means one who wrestles with God, accurate, all right? The promised messianic king, well, he's nowhere in sight, really. Sure, there were rumors going around that some Persian upstart was going to find a way to get them back home, but it's not the king they were waiting for. In other words, Babylonian powers and practices look very tempting right about now. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one, is being drowned out, and what's replacing it is, well, if you can't beat them, join them. But then, Yahweh speaks into Israel's experience, particularly in this section in Isaiah 40 through 55. And if you don't remember anything else today, and I'm serious, anything else, just listen to this, okay? And then you can delete it if you want to. This is basically what Isaiah 46 is saying, all right? The gods you're tempted to trust right now, I've seen them fail before. I've watched them crumble. I've seen those idols crush their worshipers under the weight demanding to be carried out of harm's way exactly when the people needed help. But I'm not like that. I've carried you since birth, and I'll carry you until you get that AARP card. Unlike any other God, I don't demand sacrifices to sustain me. I sustain you, remember? So take this to heart. Remember what I've done, Israel, how I've called the future before it happens like a trick billiard shot, and then I just nail it on the first time. That's why Cyrus is coming to bring you home. And since your dead hearts won't or can't reach out for that rescue, I'll bring the party to you. I'll bring the rescue to you and the entire world before I'm through with it. The Spirit is prompting Israel through Isaiah 46 and us, I think, to do three things primarily in terms of how we wait. It's look back, look through, look ahead. Got that? Look back, look through, look ahead. You say, look back. Okay, look back at what? Well, the first thing is the extraordinary failure of our false gods. That's why verses 1 through 2, they seem to be opening with a flashback. Bel crouches, Nebo cowers, idols depicting them are co-signed to beasts and cattle. The images you carry are loaded. It's a flashback of Babylon as it appeared about 200 years ago. The city is tense. You ever been in a coastal town about a day or so before the arrival of a Cat 5 like hurricane? You can cut that tension, man, right? There's a hurried lack of composure and stability. Everything has a high center of gravity. Everything feels like it could tip emotionally, like civilly, all that. That's the picture in Babylon, right? The Assyrian army led by this dude named Sennacherib, that's all you need to know about him, it's fine. He's just days away from the Babylonians, and they know they can't win it. And so in the flashback, faithful to what we know historically, we see this guy, King Merodach Baladan, he issues an evacuation order for Babylon. Not for the people, for the gods. You and I live in a post-Christian world where even the afterglow of the gospel still gives us some whiffs of God's kindness. In the ancient world, it was not women and children first, gods and images first. Why? Because letting their gods fall into enemy hands would signal defeat not just for Babylon, but the gods themselves they entrusted to protect them. And Yahweh is calling his people to look at those gods and say, where you guys see splendor, I only see failure. It's the curse of knowing what I'm talking about. These gods demand to be carried, wait for it, precisely when their followers need to be carried. And is this not exactly true of what idols always do? When life falls apart, they don't carry you, do they? They make you carry them. They make you carry the liquor bottles out of your house before your family or your roommates see them. They make you nuke your browsing history right before you let someone else use the computer. They make you rationalize their failures and run interference for their flaws, precisely when you need them to bail you out. And it's against that backdrop that God says, now look back on my ordinary faithfulness. We've seen that I've shown you the extraordinary failure of the gods. Now just look at my ordinary faithfulness, right? Verse 3, listen to me, O house of Jacob, all the remnant of the house of Israel who have been sustained from the womb, carried along since birth. There's a cool riff here you can't see in English as much, right? See where it says, you've been sustained through the womb. That's exactly the same verbiage as what occurred in verse 1. Loaded up on me since your birth. God says, the gods make you carry them. I'm the one who carries you, even in your weakest moments. And maybe Arcade Church, that's where our problem resides exactly. That for those whom Christ died for, no less, weak moments will very likely outnumber the strong ones. We're a people he had to die for, Like it's not like we're the Fantastic Four, right? Meaning that much of the grace the Holy Spirit grants us to persevere will not arrive through the dramatic Michael Bay Exodus moments. Those are a thing. Really, they're a thing. They're a part of our heritage. But most of God's grace will arrive to you in quiet, ordinary rhythms of the very lives we seldom understand ourselves. Unlike Babylon's gods, Yahweh doesn't groan under the weight of his people. He sustained them in their helplessness from the womb. What a picture, right? How much agency and prowess is a baby in utero exercising over their own survival? None. They're playing underwater jump rope, right? That's their big contribution. So God says, have you noticed? You're still standing. You're still here, man. How do you think that happened? Be specific. Draw it on the chalkboard. Sometimes I think the greatest act of faith is to give thanks that you're still standing. You're still here. You still love Jesus. His work in you, man, that stuff is tough. Can't take that down. Is it possible that the key to faithfully waiting, right, on Christ's promises is rejoicing over the ordinary grace in ordinary moments? The ones, that the super spiritual people or the hyper ambitious among us would want us to overlook. And it's only after God tells Israel to check their six, to look back, both at the gods that failed them and the God who didn't fail them, does he bid them next to look through. Well, look through what? To look through the glam of the gods in front of them to see the sham underneath. Those who pour out their bags of gold and weigh out silver on scales, they hire a goldsmith and he makes it into a god and they kneel down before it. Look down at verse 7, the very end. It saves no one from their troubles. Idols demand everything but give nothing in return. You know where I've seen this the most vividly? It's usually, so there's been almost a dozen, I'd say, and just in like ministry land. When I've sat with couples where one of them had an affair, the dude or the gal usually has her head in her hands, ropes of snot coming off their nose, and they're saying, "What was I thinking?" And confession time, myself, when they walk me through everything that happened, I'm like, what were you thinking? Because I think this has been the case about every time. The person they cheated with had the same annoying traits as their spouse, but worse. I'm serious. An objective observer looking in will just say, I don't get it. What was it about that? It's the story behind it. They thought they found a better story. You feel that? And affairs are expensive. Right? It's a lot of hiding, a lot of just jockeying and moving stuff around and all that kind of stuff. It's a lot of work, kind of like the work they're going to here in verse 6 and 7. And they have nothing in return. You know who knocks this out of the park in terms of describing it in a way that just makes you stare at your steering wheel for 20 minutes after a sermon or whatever? It's Lewis. It's always C.S. Lewis. That's the answer. But here we go. In the Screwtape Letters, he's writing as this fictional demon mentoring this less experienced demon. And he goes, Wormwood. It's more certain and it's better style to get the man's soul and leave him nothing in return. That's what really gladdens Satan's heart. And the trough times of waiting are the time for beginning that process. As one of my own patients said on his arrival down here, he said, "I now see that I spent most of my life in doing neither what I ought nor what I liked. God's not like that. God isn't playing games. It makes me think of Jesus' statements when he says, if you ask for bread, am I going to give you a scorpion, in one of the Gospels? And it makes sense there. There were scorpions kind of on the ground there that they would sort of get in this weird shape that if you looked at them from an angle, it kind of looked like a nugget of bread almost. Or if you ask for a fish, will I give you a serpent? Those things look really similar if you're squinting, right? He's saying God's not playing games with you. The gods you're tempted to flee to in panic mode, oh, they'll play you like a harp. Every time. Look through the glam and see the sham. The third aspect to waiting well is to look ahead. It's to look ahead. The first place, pretty predictable, to God's future sustaining grace. You'll notice we didn't hit verse 4 after 3 where he's describing the way I carried you in the womb, etc. Look at verse 4. I'll be the same until your old age, and I will bear you up when you turn gray. I've made you, and I will carry you. I will bear you, and I will rescue you. The grace in your life that got you to this point is the same entity that's going to meet you down the road. They're not separate things. It's like a piece of marble with like no seam in it. It's the same structure. And that's comforting. Because when I look back on God's sustaining grace, and even that sort of temptation to reminisce about the good old days when things were simpler, I felt God more, right? I'm growing. This Christian thing makes sense. I realize I actually had very little to do with that too. Maybe you're the same. Think of like the unicorn mentors, or forget mentors, friends you've just had in Jesus who help peel you off the ceiling. In most of those cases, you probably didn't put an ad out in the paper. Well, nobody does that anymore, but you probably didn't make an advertisement saying wanted a friend and like interview and audition them to see who would be amazing at this. You were living your life, and God T-boned you with grace you didn't even know you needed. There's a sweetness that I know it has invaded some of your experiences, and actually you've been waiting a while to re-encounter that. And you're tempted to think, well, maybe I need a new church, or maybe I need new friends. Maybe I need a new boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, whatever. And the temptation is to start like monkeying with stuff. It doesn't work like that, man. The best things in your experience, have you noticed you had very little to do with how they came about? That same grace, that will find you. Be of good cheer. I mean that. So we look ahead to God's sustaining ordinary grace. Ordinary, right? But you also look forward to his ultimate faithfulness. This is interesting. Okay, go ahead and just jump to verse 12 for me. First part of verse 12. Listen to me, you hard-hearted, far removed from justice. Blistering, man, but accurate. There's more to this than meets the eye. This is a theme we see a lot show up in the New Testament too, where God has to power through obstinance and just, Craig's phrase, like, give God the finger, it's in the Hebrew, man. But it's right on. It's right on. But you know what's crazy, too? There's another side of that coin that might dovetail to your experience just a little bit more kind of exactly in this season of life you're in. And it's found in something called the Septuagint. Here's what you need to know. All right. Jesus and the apostles and those guys, they liked their Hebrew Bible, but they also liked their Greek translation of their Hebrew Bible. Paul uses a Septuagint probably 80% of the time when he's quoting the Old Testament. And this is interesting. When you look at the way the Septuagint brings this across, there's a subtly different flavor. See if you can catch it. Listen to me, you who have ruined your hearts. I say that as a man who's also ruined my own heart multiple times. That hits different. Like the Hebrew in Isaiah, it's saying, you guys are stubborn, and I will pound through that stubbornness to the glory of God and the good of all people, and that includes you. The Greek of Isaiah, it carries a more tragic tone, doesn't it? As though the individuals are not merely resistant, but have actively ruined or lost their capacity for righteousness, or let's be honest, they lost the will to care. Does that resonate with anybody here? Do you ever just I don't care, but I want to. But then instead of going to God's people and just processing that and getting in the Word, we bury it in Netflix, and it just putrefies even more, and I'm losing the ability to give a rip. Right? Okay, someone knows. I'll enjoy my futon in hell. In other words, it's speaking more to the damage sin and failure cause us. Because there's no such thing as an experience that isn't a formative experience in some way. And I think it emphasizes that Jesus also came to restore the brokenhearted. Linguistically, it's the same root there when Jesus goes after a lost sheep, too. You ever just feel like he has your number? So whether you have a stubborn heart or a shattered heart, God's power to restore and renew that, you can't stop it. You can't. He doesn't know how to fail. He doesn't know how. Right? And that explains also what we're looking ahead to. It's the way God will sovereignly rescue us into new creation. Look at the second half of verse 12 and verse 13, okay? Far removed from justice, I am bringing my justice near. There are ways around that. It is not far away. And my salvation will not delay. I will put salvation in Zion, my splendor in Israel. You know, the true, beautiful, and perfect version of what they thought they saw in the false gods, splendor. You know what this passage is right here is saying at the end of the day? It's this. The scandal of grace is that what God demands of you with his left hand, he supplies to you with his right hand. It's a lot of this. And that's good news for people who struggle to care, for people who honestly want to give up waiting for Christ to make things right because, well, is he even coming? You know what? You know what's so strange? Almost every group of people waiting for God in the scriptures, they thought the plot of their struggle was, will God show? But he always did. The real plot was, they didn't know it was this. By the time God shows, will I still be the kind of person who cares? Or will I have wilted and atrophied and fallen apart so many times that I meet his mercy with a sneer and say, what happened? You hit traffic? The good news is, 12 through 13 is basically saying this. Everything you need to inherit the kingdom is supplied to you. You're declared to be righteous, legitimately apart from your rap sheet or your record. You're also given a life-changing rightness that not only it's not even about doing the right thing, it's about loving the right thing. Like, and being the kind of person who can actually rejoice with things that are beautiful. And it's a faithful righteousness too. And there's this idea in the Old Testament especially that a lot of times the justice or righteousness of God, what it's actually referring to is God vindicating the hope people did have in him by showing up at just the right time and showing off when he does. All of that is yours by faith because of an Israelite who is no mere Israelite. It's because of the man who would do 40 days of temptation to bitterness in the desert when it took Israel 40 years to complete. Here's some practical encouragements for the waiting while we look back, while we look through, and while we look ahead, okay? First one's pretty straightforward. Accept the strangeness of your life. How strange, we can talk after. But it was just, it was weird. We were hanging Christmas decorations, and we had one part kind of janky at our fireplace where, you can just kind of see the extension cord when it goes like that. And I just imagine my 4-year-old going, "Daddy, when did you know you wanted to grow up and have an orange extension cord ruin your Christmas decorations?" It's I didn't plan this. Lives are just rough and tumble sometimes, right? They're actually, but you wouldn't know it on our glowing rectangles, would you? It's usually just an indictment of beauty you don't possess somehow, decor you don't possess, a home you don't possess, that kind of thing. Real life and real exile, it's complicated. Don't let anybody tell you different. Because if you're sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, my life is so," it's not even hard sometimes, it's just weird, and I don't know what to do with that. That's okay. So was the Israelites' life. So was Jesus' life. But secondly, I would say this. Properly connect and separate the promise of his second coming, of the second advent, right? Properly connect and separate the promise from its foretastes. So when we talk about God keeping his promises, right? Or God intervening for us, God, breaking through, what do we mean? Are we doing speaking of chess, kind of spiritual chess, but silent chess, where we're I'll say God's going to intervene in your experience, but we all know what I actually mean is on the last day, he's going to split the eastern sky and then make everything okay. I'm not actually speaking to your cancer. I'm not actually speaking to this. I'm doing this this weird ninjutsu thing to not talk about your experience because I don't know how to talk about your experience because I don't want to accidentally confuse the coming of Christ with a problem in the meantime. That's where most of us live, right? It's hard to know how to encourage people with Jesus when we don't know the rules of what will Jesus monkey with now versus what will he leave till the last day, right? When we say in the waiting, do we mean just waiting for how he'll come at the end of history, or does it also speak to those waiting for Christ to intervene now in specific life situations? A relationship, a marriage, physical healing, a job, fertility issues, sobriety, grief, reconciliation. Here's why Isaiah 46 is helpful for me in my experience, okay? Passages like these show us that our waiting for God to act in our current lives is deeply connected as we wait for him to keep the big covenant promises. They're not identical, but they're connected in some way. And you know what it's like? I think it's like this. Hope, the geography of hope in a Christian life, I'm not the one who came up with this image, but I think it's helpful here. It's like a curve in a waterfall. I think Christian hope is like a curve in a waterfall. There's continuity of form. It's the same thing. But there's discontinuity in substance. What happens to be running through that channel of water? What happens to be running through that grace in the meantime? And I think those channels look like this. As we wait for Jesus and everything that means or doesn't mean. I think things get simpler if we think of it like this. Jesus is at work in the now, the next, and the forever. Sometimes the forever. There was one time in the Arctic where the northern lights were actually rumored to touch the ground. I don't know if it's true, but people said they could hear a crackling when it happened. I think that's what healing is like. It's the forever grace, but it shot all the way through, like all the way down, and kind of met you where you are, so you saw a preview of the new creation. Here's what it's gonna be like. And then like the illness goes away, right? It whets your appetite, not to just like hold on to this life for everything it's worth, but it actually makes you long for the next because it says it'll look a little bit like that, right? In Isaiah 46, you see Israel grappling. If you have the now, the next, and the forever, they're grappling with the next. Especially if you back up to Isaiah 45. Cyrus is going to do it. He's going to bring it back. Cyrus, really? They were waiting for like the Davidic king to like make all this go curtains in a good way. And it's Cyrus. There's a partial flicker of the coming intervention of God nested on a spectrum in the human experience. I think that's how hope works on a dimmer switch from our present experience, the now, the next, and the forever. They're not separate. They touch the ground at different times. But it's all coming from the same source, the risen Christ from Nazareth. A few weeks from now, you're going to open presents that you'll keep and presents that you'll lose interest in probably as soon as the relatives leave. I get it. But Emmanuel, God with us, he isn't like the other gifts you've received. To quote Isaiah, to whom will you compare him? Christ is the gift who possesses you, not the other way around. And while you and I have phases, the punk phase, the chess phase, whatever, Jesus doesn't have phases with you. You ever ask yourself that? Is Jesus just having a coal phase right now? And will he drop me the first time I'm inconvenient? He doesn't do that. There is no Jennifer phase. There's no Mike phase. There's no Amy phase. There's no Andrew phase. It's forever. So be of good cheer. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. This man has no phases. Pray with me, and then we'll welcome Craig to the stage to welcome our new members. Father, persevering in faith it's not as easy as we often make it sound. Remind us that in all of these strange things, you are actually for us. Remind us that you have arced our lives to walk with you in the cool of the day once more. And there is nothing in our experience that will veto that. Because death itself has been vetoed in the risen Christ. Draw us near, keep us close. You know we like to wander. Don't let us do that. Thank you for not letting us do that. In Christ's name, amen. Thank you.
If you have questions about this sermon, email them to us at info@arcadechurchonline.com. You can find out what's been going on with us by searching for Arcade Church on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you want more content from Arcade Church, check out our podcast, Behold, on all platforms that stream podcasts. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you soon.